second hour of the War Room, and Dr. Steve Pieczenik is about to join me. Really a lot to cover with Dr. Pieczenik. I'm not sure what is on his radar. I mean, we could go anywhere right now. The roller coaster stock market, the ZTE deal with Trump and China, what's behind that? The North Korea deal, it's on, it's off. Was Trump using John Bolton, or did John Bolton unwittingly play bad cop for Trump? And then, of course, you've got the continuing developments in the Gaza Strip and everything there, but that's really just been going on for a long time. So I'm not sure where Dr. Pieczenik wants to go. There was something else, too. Oh, yeah, the power struggle in Italy right now, as the EU is going to try to stop the populist movement in Italy. Dr. Pieczenik, I kind of just gave you a groundwork there of what you think is the biggest story, so where would you like to go?
Owen, as usual, let's go down the list. Italy. Italy wants to get out of the EU. I'm with it. Number one, the Progressive Party, the five-star movement, which is created by Di Maio, M-A-I-O, was elected to run the country. And instead, a gentleman by the name of Mattarella, who was the president, who was not elected, decided that he would appoint an IMF monetary fund, World Bank banker in order to make sure that they wouldn't leave the EU. The real issue with Italy is that it created a lot of problems in our stock market. As you saw, the up and down had nothing to do with Trump. It had more to do with Italy and whether it was or was not going to leave EU. From my point of view, I've said it for years, the EU is a fictitious construct created by Germany, accepted by France in order to constrain all the countries economically, as opposed to what Germany did militarily, First World War, Second World War. The French thought they could entrap the Germans by accepting EU, and the point of fact is Germany is the powerhouse. So all the countries on the northern tier, Norway, Sweden, Holland, Belgium, they all work along the EU currency. However, Poland and Hungary, that's becoming nationalist, they do not want to be part of the EU. The EU is another 35,000 to 60,000 layer of bureaucrats in Brussels, which itself is not a country. It's between the Walloons and the Flemish. And then you have below that Italy that wants to break away, Greece that had a debt problem. You have Spain, you have Portugal. All those countries want to leave. The problem with Italy leaving is that everything that was denominated in the EU, that is 136% of their debt, will be converted into Italian debt. And in fact, what would happen is the lira would go down in value, so would savings, and the banks would go bankrupt. Now, what the EU has done, that is Germany, is very clever. It created an entrapment, a financial entrapment for all the lower-end countries where they could use the labor and export a lot of their own goods into Spain, Greece, Italy, etc. But at the same time, Germany was too clever and too shrewd to vouchsafe for the banks. In other words, they didn't insure the banks of those countries so that the banks could go under as long as they were not in the EU or under the euro. But they didn't insure it in order to make sure that the lira, if it converted to the lira, it would go into bankruptcy. So Italy is now fighting between a legitimate government and an opposed government. I'm going with the legitimate government and the young people of Italy to say, I believe in you. I think that the notion of bringing back the old men, once again, does not help Italy. Italy has the third largest growth rate, but its growth rate according to the German EU Deutschmark, which it's based on, instead of the lira. I think every country needs to go back to its own printing press and therefore can get out of deflation and inflation. And that's what happened with Greece. So I am for an Italian progressive party like the Five Stars. I am against any imposition on it. And I think they should stabilize the country so that our stock markets can be stable. Does that get a lot of...
Yeah, but, you know, it's incredible because let's kind of explain the historical aspect of this, and I want to get your take on this. It's almost, to me, I'm looking at this situation now, and you've got Juncker, Nazi collaborator, the head of the EU, unelected. I mean, and then you scratch your head, but then you realize, like you referenced earlier, well, what did Hitler really want to do? I mean, what was the political ideology behind the Nazis? Well, he wanted to make the EU. I mean, that was like Hitler's brainchild. Juncker was in on it. So it's like they learned, though. I think, Stephen, this is where we get into the psychology of it. When you get into regime change and how globalists and communists advance, they understood, okay, well, Hitler's tactics obviously didn't work. The by force, the by threat, the by false flag to try to bring in power into a one European Union that way. They rolled it out with the progressive liberalism message and said, oh, we'll all come together. Oh, let's be together. Oh, let's be open. Oh, let's be one. And so they learned that the Hitler method didn't work by force, which used to work in the past with just brute force. Humans advanced. They advanced mentally. They advanced physically. And so then they realized we can't do it that way. We have to use a psychological attack to bring the EU in. So we'll just call it liberal and progressive, and then everybody will fall for it. Well, they already did, but now they're seeing the truth about it, Steve. And I think that that's why you're starting to see some of these countries pull back.
Well, you hit it on the head. The only difference is I would just make a slight difference in the beginning. The EU was proposed by French socialists for fear that Germany would get up again. And they knew very well, as I knew France, France is not the same dynamic of Germany, that Germany could create World War I, World War II. This speaks for the fact that Germany is a formidable country of entrepreneurs and workers, and France is not. You have the 4-day week, you have the 3-month holiday. It's all the same nonsense of socialism. So France, in its so-called sophisticated way, got trapped into entrapping Germany into the concept of the EU. And Germany said, sure, no, why not? But we'll determine the concepts of the EU according to the Frankfurt Bank. Not the French bank, but the Frankfurt Bank. Once the Frankfurt Bank went into effect, then the Deutschmark was the dominant force, and from the Deutschmark it went to EU. I was in France with my family, and when I saw that conversion from the Deutschmark and the franc into the EU, I said, this is the end of France, this is the end of Italy, this is the end of England, this is pretty much a nonsensical idea.
But it's crazy. It's crazy that they don't even care. I mean, that's the wildest thing about it. It seems like the populations don't even care, but finally you have uprisings in Spain. Finally you have uprisings in Italy. And it's just incredible to me that, you talk to an average person in France, at least people that I've spoken to, I mean, they seem to just be not even care, like nonchalant, like neither, oh, sure, EU, France, oh, whatever, we're progressive. And that seems to be kind of how this culture is able to be taken over. I don't know if you want to comment on that, but I want to just get your comment real quick in the final minute and a half here. So 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, the Iran deal being canceled, the capital in Jerusalem leads to the biggest story and all of the media focus being on Israel, Jerusalem, the Gaza Strip, Palestine. And it's the big story, huge, riots, fighting, white hats, this, Hamas, everything, okay? And then it just kind of dies out. Nobody's talking about it anymore. Everybody's news correspondents that used to be there, they're all pulled home. Well, there was no conclusion. There was no closure. There was no deal reached. So what's the deal there, Steve? Why did it go from huge story, focus here, to now it's just, okay, back to normal, they're fighting?
Because Trump wanted to create a diversion. He sent Jared Kushner there. There was the Jerusalem Day, all that kind of nonsense, in order to focus away from what was going into Asia. But I must add one thing. Trump, Mattis, and Dunford had done an amazing thing, and that was not brought up on your show or anybody's show. In February of 2018, we had 30 very experienced Delta Force and about 20 Rangers up the north part of Syria, working with the Kurds and the Arabs near ConocoPhillips gas terminal. And the Russians, the Wagner Group, which was considered a mercenary group, but really was part of the Russian GRU, military intelligence under Putin, came and started to attack our forces. They were 400. All
right. We got to take a break. But we're going to get to the end of that with Dr. Steve Pieczenik on the other side. Don't go anywhere. This is the War Room. All right, before we took that break, Dr. Pieczenik was getting into what happened between U.S. and Russian forces in Syria. I'm just going to give it right back over to Dr. Pieczenik to break that down. Start from the top where you were talking about General Dunford and General Mattis and the strategy employed by them.
Well, our strategy has been to avoid any conflict. And basically, we had allowed the Russians to come in and take over part of the problems that we would have had. But instead, we came in with special forces, Delta forces, to work with the Kurds on the northern border of Syria. And what we were doing was maintaining stability. The Russians were also there, but they were under the guise of what was called the Wagner Group. The Wagner Group is really an outcrop of the GRU, Russian military intelligence, right under the direction of Putin. And they started to attack our 30 Rangers and 30 Delta guys who were just helping out. And they started to attack in the numbers of about 500 Soviet, Russian soldiers with T-72s, 125 millimeter howitzers, and Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, got on the phone and tried to deconflict the area, and the Russians just didn't listen. So Dunford was ordered by Mattis, who I greatly admire. Both of these guys I greatly admire. And Mattis just said, annihilate them. And in 4 hours, our B-52s came in, our F-15s came in, our Warhawks came in, and just decimated all the Russian troops. Now, this is a warning to Putin, whom I've said repeatedly. You're on notice. Putin thinks that he's in control of a country which has 11 time zones. My impression is that you're not in control of that. He knows very well that I was involved in the takedown of the Soviet Union. He's always wanted to meet me to discuss it, but I won't. But the point of fact is I was in Lubyanka prison at the time before he was appointed. So I knew the KGB guys who didn't know that Putin would be the next head of the KGB. And what I'm basically saying is our military officers and our civilians are very patient right now. But if any more movement goes with Putin and he attempts any other assault on American soldiers, those forces that he will initiate will be devastated. And that's a warning to the Chinese as well. But Putin is more likely to try that again, and it won't work. So there was a war there. We closed it up. Trump said very little. I give him credit. Mattis said nothing. Dunford said nothing. And we went on as if everything was normal. At the same time, Bibi, of course, went out of control, and that's when he had the Jerusalem nonsense and the embassy moving over to Jerusalem while Iran said, okay, you want to be out of the treaty, then we will do what we need to do. So they shifted to the Russians. The Russians really couldn't supply Iran with what it needed, so they shifted to the Chinese. The Chinese are trying to do what they could, but my opinion is that we should maintain trade with Iran simply because I want our companies, Halliburton.
And just to stop you right there, it appears to me that Iran now, like you said, China, Russia, they're going to the EU now to try to get whatever semblance of the deal they can get without the United States being involved. Maybe it turns out that they need us. Maybe it doesn't. You say it'll turn out that way. Trump is going to look like a genius on that if that ends up being the case. But just to clarify, I'm imagining then those are the hundreds of Russians that Pompeo talked about the U.S. forces killing when he was testifying to Congress?
That's correct. Pompeo.
Now, doesn't it tell you, though, Pompeo, doesn't it tell you, now, what do you think about this? Understanding the psychology of everything and how Trump controls narratives, what does it tell you about President Trump that in the middle of this Trump-Russia collusion witch hunt, he chooses not to make a big deal of the Russians that we fought and killed in Syria? He chooses to not even mention that in the middle of him being called a Russian agent. What does that tell you about where President's head is at right now?
I understand, and you hit it on the head. He's basically not really concerned about collusion because there isn't any collusion. It's absurd when the president or anybody else talks to Russian advisors or people like that. We've done that for 40, 50 years. But that's not the issue. What he's really concerned about is controlling the narrative so that his actions in Syria are very clear and demonstrative to North Korea and Kim Jong-un. So Kim Jong-un understood very well, without having to have a joint military actions with South Korea, which we had, that we will kill if we need to. At the same time, the Chinese were warned very clearly, do not mess with our ships in the Straits of Malacca or on the Spratly Islands. So what he does is to create a lot of verbal destruction while his actions are very defined, very clear-cut, and he mentions nothing about it. He didn't gloat about it. Yeah. He was not as obsessed. and obsequious and
in the media is all focused on the Gaza Strip. It's almost like the perfect crime. I want to get into. Go ahead.
Let me say one thing. I mean, contrast to Obama, who said, "Oh yeah, I killed Osama bin Laden," which of course he lied. Osama bin Laden.
Yeah, Osama bin Laden was already dead.
Right, already dead. You have a man here who actually did devastate Russian forces and said nothing to that effect.
Yeah. It shows you the restraint and the character, I think, of what Trump is doing right now. Right. Steve, before we let you go here with 2.5 minutes left, I want to get into the North Korean thing, which you started to get into. Did President Trump knowingly use John Bolton as the bad cop to get this North Korea thing moved forward? Did John Bolton unwittingly go through with this, or did Bolton know his role? What do you make of the whole deal on, deal off after Bolton makes the Libyan comments? Trump walks it back, saying, no, not the Libyan strategy, but we'll kick your ass if we have to. Now North Korea wants to deal again. Did Bolton, was that a strategy used by Trump, or did it just work out that way?
Well, it's Trump's strategy to begin with. Number one, he was told by Shelley Adelson ad nauseum to bring John Bolton in. Adelson's an idiot. I mean, basically one of the key idiots of the mob in terms of controlling casinos in Las Vegas. And in turn, his proclivity for Israel is due to his wife. But the point is, he's a fool. He just funds John Bolton. Bolton has never fought. Bolton has never really done regime change, unlike myself. We would never ask Bolton to do it. I knew Bolton. I threw out Wormser and a bunch of his other deputies. So they're not effective. The reason that Trump used them is as pawns. The minute they came in, everybody could say, oh, he's shifting to the right, when he did nothing of the fact. What he's doing is, again, the art of the deal. He's creating confusion, uncertainty, and he's playing with the players in such a way that he's forcing Kim Jong-un to come to the forefront and basically destroy his own nuclear capability before Trump even gets into the discussions. So what he's doing is he's pushing it to the last brim. Bolton at some point will be thrown out because he's really of no value. People like Kelly and others like Mattis can't stand him. He's a coward. He's a Vietnam draft dodger. All of these guys are the neocons who are cowards. They all sent people to war, but they themselves said, we don't want to die in the foxholes. So he's just a pawn. The real implementers are going to be Mattis. The one I talked about was from, what's his name, Owen, the gentleman from Goldman Sachs, who's done Ross, who's done the turnarounds. He's going to be a key negotiator as opposed to Mnuchin. And at the same time, it will still be John Kelly or one of the deputies involved. So
it sounds like President Trump wittingly used John Bolton as a pawn in a genius manner to get the North Korean deal to the next level. Dr. Steve Pieczenik, StevePieczenik.com. Thank you so much, and my pleasure as always. We'll be right back.